Thank you, James and Matt, for the invitation and the opportunity to be here this evening. James, I'm not really sure that I agree injury prevention was best under the lockdown. Both my, albeit adult children, ended up, one with a split shin from box jumping and the other with her ACL skateboarding. So either we're completely non-coordinated, I'm not sure, but never mind. Developing water competence in children. Do big people know best? I just want to put drowning in the world perspective, and it's quite, I guess, recent that you're right, I think, the global report on drowning only came out in 2014 and talked about a serious and neglected public health threat. There are about 372,000 drowning victims every year, so more than, predominantly in low and middle income countries, but almost 2/3 that of malnutrition and well over half that of malaria. The implementation guide on your left talks about some 10 evidence-based strategies that can help prevent drowning. In New Zealand, we have a water safety sector strategy, and it is from 2015 to 2020, and it's currently being updated now. But there are 4 strategies there about preventable drowning: the total fatalities, hospitalisations, male fatalities, and preschool fatalities. Oh my, it didn't come up. And just to talk about some numbers in New Zealand, the first column is in the Auckland region. The middle column is New Zealand preventable drowning deaths. And the green column there is hospitalisations. So often in injury, we talk about the iceberg phenomenon of one death with, to 10 hospitalisations or injury. Well, it's not quite that for drowning. Generally, with drowning, it's either a drowning death or very often a rescue or a recovery. And unfortunately, you people will be obviously see the numbers and the people that come through the hospitalisations. So we're talking about less than 100 drownings in New Zealand per annum, about 150 to 200 hospitalisations. And the drowning rates, apart from a spike in 2019, they are generally trending down, and they have been trending downwards for the last 20 or 30 years. This graph shows you female to male ratio. Generally, drowning is a male disease. I'm quite safe. Not quite safe. But just look at the green number there, or the size of compared to the drowning deaths. With hospitalisations, it isn't quite so much. So you do see a higher ratio of females in the hospitalisations. This graph here shows you some age brackets from 5 years. So the first one is the preschool. Generally, 30 years ago, we used to have 17, 18 drownings per annum in New Zealand, preschoolers, and that's dropped off quite significantly. These aren't rates there, or percentages, sorry. They are percentages, but we have about 4 to 8 in New Zealand per annum now. Again, you can see the green figure there. It's, have I got this? I'm not sure if I have. I'm sure that I can work this. But the green figure there, you can see is hospitalisations is a lot higher for preschoolers than the other ages. our drowning trend at the moment is for those over the adults, over the youth age. We used to have a big spike of preschoolers, then a nice safe age, if you like, of childhood, and it would increase for the youth. But now we're starting to see an increase in drownings in adults and older adults. I just wanted to look at, just pick out some of these points for preschool drowning. And I'm talking just about the drowning because that's what we get better circumstantial data about as opposed to the non-fatal drowning. So in the 5 years, in the last 5 years to 2019, there were 23 0 to 4 year drownings. All resulted from accidental immersion. Almost all when the child was left unsupervised. Most were male, about 80% of drowning is male. Almost half were in home pools, and that's, as a percentage, has reduced quite significantly. But almost half were in what's termed inland still waters, so ponds or troughs. And there was one drowning in a bath, which is probably a lot less than there used to be. Just going back to that home pool, almost all of those home pools were in unlegislated or uncomplying pools, in terms of uncomplying with the fencing. So, drowning is complex, just like everything else, and I'll just go through some of its complexities. This model here, and I'm not sure if you can read it, but it's a model I've put together for my research questions, for my studies, and it's based on Carl Newell's dynamic constraints theory of person, task, and environment. So all drowning is related to the personal, individual statistics or the individual, or the environment that it's in, and the activity or the task that you're doing. And each of those is related to your competence and your risk. And for each, the competence and the risk, we have a perception about that, or how good we think we are, or how big or how dangerous the risk is, and then the reality of actually how good you are, or how actually dangerous the risk is. And my hypothesis here is that if reality doesn't match the perception, which is the two circles in the middle, then we will have some drowning incidences. Another relatively new thought process is that rather than learning to swim, there are 15 competencies that we need to be safe from drowning. And there are 15, I don't want to list them all, but they range from being able to enter the water safely, or exit the water safely, or go under the water safely, or be able to orientate, or be able to wear life jackets, or be able to know where the hazards are, know where the rips are, be able to help somebody, know how to help somebody if they're in trouble in the water, the attitudes and the values, your behaviours around water, and assessing your personal competency. And I've left just there the two papers that talk about this and the evidence around that, and they're relatively recent. There's a 2017 paper and a 2018 paper. Next, I just want to talk about 4 studies that have been done around parents and young children. And the first one was a study with 882 parents of children aged 2 to 4 years. And those parents were either attending, the children were either attending early childhood centres or swimming lessons. And we found that most parents, or a lot of parents, thought that swimming was best taught at a young age, and more parents of children attending swim schools thought that swimming should be best taught at 2 years or less. Swimming was the best way to prevent toddler drowning. So by teaching your child to swim, parents thought that was the best way to prevent toddler drowning. Almost half parents thought that children could learn to save themselves in a drowning incident, and that it was better to develop their swimming ability than rely on adult supervision. So almost a third, or over a third of parents thought that they'd best rely on swimming lessons than supervise their children. So that was pretty scary, really, to hear that. And we thought that that was a pretty overly optimistic view of the role of swimming ability in swimming lessons to prevent drowning. The next study we looked at, we thought, well, hang on, these swimming lessons are a real opportunity to educate parents about water safety. So there were 106 parents that took part in a block of, lots of different lessons, but a block of 10 lessons. And they did provide a really worthwhile, it was a really worthwhile opportunity for education. So more parents correctly identified drowning risk, and they agreed that toddlers needed more supervision after the lessons than before the lessons. And they, after the lessons, thought that actually the lessons should be more about fun than drowning prevention. So fewer parents thought that of safety as the main reason for the lessons, or that swimming was the best way to prevent drowning. So, you know, that was a step in the right direction. So the study suggested that toddler lessons in the swim schools provided a real valuable opportunity to address those parental misconceptions. The study was done, we did this 2007, I think, 2006, and really only now, some almost 15 years later, we're starting to change that tide within, or the whole reason to be for toddler swimming lessons. This study was completed at beaches. It was an observational study of caregivers at 18 beaches predominantly around the North Island. So it was parents or caregivers with children of all ages, and it found that a quarter of the children in the water weren't adequately supervised. Most supervision was completed by just one person, irrespective of whether parents were looking after one child or looking after a group of children. Of the caregivers not providing adequate supervision, about a third were sunbathing, about almost a third were talking to others, and another third were on their phones, quite distracted. So the recommendation was that, out of that, was around education for parents and caregivers. The last study that I want to talk about was, again, parents, and this one was school-aged children, and we asked parents about their competence and risk for themselves and their children. 185 parents in 6 schools around Auckland. So most parents thought they could swim quite well. Most parents thought their children could swim quite well as well. And almost 2/3 thought their children could swim either good or very good. When you ask them what that means, so 2/3 of them could swim less than 25 metres. 3/4 of them hadn't been in the open water. They couldn't do that in the open water. But over half of parents thought their children were safe in open water. So, get that. So, we figured there was a real disconnect between the perception of risk and the perception of competence. Although I haven't mentioned it, the perception of safety was influenced by gender. So you know how males think they're really good? Males thought their children were really good as well. And we figured that, the perception of how good is good enough was pretty low. So just some take-home messages. Do big people know best? There does seem to be a disconnect between how good we think we are and how good parents or caregivers think their children are and how good they really are. If the aquatic lessons, if your water safety swimming lessons, the whole purpose of that is for drowning prevention, then they need to include the 15 water competencies, not just one. Swimming is just one of those. Swimming's number 5. Okay, if you're going to swimming lessons and the focus is on drowning prevention, then it needs more than swimming. So, are the big people teaching the right content here? The last thing is around supervision, and as we can see, supervision does seem to be pretty woeful. So there does need to be some education around what supervision is. And supervision is such this big ghastly word, What does it mean? And it means more than just looking. Looking's a part of it. There's the proximity, there's the lack of distraction, and there's also that ability to respond in an emergency. So those are all the components of supervision that somehow we need to get that message across. But we also know that no matter how good a parent or how bad a parent we may be, we can't supervise 24/7. There's going to be times that we just cannot be there. So we need to start relying on those other layers of protection. And those other layers of protection are things like your barriers and your water safety behaviours and the rules that you have around water, and the final step, the child's CPR and resuscitation.